Okay, well, just let me know when I have to change the slides, okay?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I believe you can start, Dr. Lubart. I'm going to introduce you to the audience in Portuguese, okay?
Yeah.
Todd Lubart é psicólogo, PhD em Psicologia pela Yale University, atua como professor no Instituto de Psicologia da Université em Paris, no qual coordena o Laboratório de Cognição e Desenvolvimento. É presidente da International Society for the Study of Creativity and Innovation e um dos autores da teoria do investimento em criatividade, uma das mais citadas na literatura em criatividade. Também é autor do instrumento de criatividade EPOC, Evaluation of Potential Creativity. Dr. Lubart é um dos pesquisadores mais renomados da área de criatividade, tendo publicado centenas de artigos, capítulos e livros. Todd Lubart, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. It's an honor to have you here with us. And I believe the participants are very excited to have you with us today. Thank you so much. And if you want to start your presentation, feel free to do it.
Okay. Thank you, Denise, for that invitation to come. And so I'm going to focus on ideas about creativity in the educational sector. And I will provide a finalized version if you want this PowerPoint PDF. I will send later today a finalized version because I had a few things to switch on this particular PDF for you. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so as you may know, of course, creativity is not a very new capacity for people. And if you go to our ancestors, even way back 2 million years ago, you have evidence of creative thinking, such as making tools out of stone. And that was used for hunting. About 2 million years ago, Homo habilis did tool making, creating the idea that rocks could be shaped into hunting tools. 40,000 years ago, you've got examples of cave art or drawings in Lascaux, for example, paintings on the wall about hunting scenes. Maybe it was artistic in nature or a kind of a new way to communicate ideas visually. So this is part of our heritage for a long time. Next. And in this slide here, I suggest a very simple starting definition of creativity, which we'll focus on today as a topic, as a capacity that helps people to produce ideas or work, content, that is novel and valuable in its context. So all kinds of work, all kinds of ideas could be original for the person, the individual, or original for their social group or their class group or their larger social context, like everybody in their country or on the whole earth. And to the extent that an original idea has interest, value, meaning, we'd say it has novelty and value, making it creative. And you can be creative in all different sectors: artistic, scientific, business, culinary, engineering, mathematical. Even in daily life, of course, you could solve problems in a new way in your own life. Next. Nowadays, we talk about the 21st century competencies, and creativity is one of them. So there are studies like IBM study of head of companies around the world who cite creativity as a top ability for management. Adobe survey of teachers and parents that endorses creativity as very important in schools. OECD study of more than 10 countries examining if creativity can be educated, and creativity will be part of the future PISA assessment. And World Economic Forum listing creativity as one of the top 3 capacities for employability in the next 20 years. Next slide. However, I'd like to contrast Homo sapiens, who are marked by their knowledge, their intelligence, their expertise in handling knowledge, with what we call Homo creativus, which is people who are, in particular, being inventors, being creative. And if you look at correlations between IQ, which measures classical intelligence and predicts school grades, with creativity measures, the correlations are usually positive but low, like correlation 0.10, 0.20. A meta-analysis shows 0.17 on average. So they're relatively unrelated, creativity and typical intelligence as typically defined in school by good grades. And school grades in particular correlate also low, like maybe in the 0.10 area often, but sometimes even negatively occasionally. Like doing well at school means you're not too good at creativity because you become so good at the normal school stuff. Next slide. And so Binet, who was an inventor of one of the first intelligence tests that later went on through history to become the WISC, as a basis of the WISC, he was interested in being smart at school. And in his first test, he included all kinds of measures, including measures of creative thinking, except he realized it didn't predict school success in France in 1904, so he removed them from his concept of intelligence testing because they served no real purpose to predict school grades. In terms of extended work, of course, you see a picture there of Guilford, who had a theory of intelligence called the structure of intelligence, which included intelligence in the traditional way and creative divergent thinking and other capacities. And so for both Binet and Guilford, creativity was really part and linked with intelligence. But over the years, we've grown to talk about them kind of separately. And 21st century competencies at school refer in particular to what they call the 4 C's: critical thinking, creative thinking, collaboration, communication. And so many educational systems are now turning to schools based on the 4C model for the next years as the core. Next slide. In the next slide, I'd like to just mention that you see there 7 squares in blue. And I just mentioned this because lately I've been talking what we call the 7 C's of creativity, which has got a double meaning because the C, each C is an aspect of creativity. But the 7 C's, like the oceans, refers to metaphorically the whole world. And so if you look at the 7 C letters, you've got different facets of creativity that could be interesting to think about at school. The creator is the creative person. What's their personality? How to develop who they are? What's their kind of thinking? Creating is the process of making new ideas. And you teach children how to engage the process. Collaboration is a mode of creativity in which you work in a dyad or group. Would be interesting at school. Context is like school classroom. Maybe the school classroom can be set up to foster creativity. Creation is what they produce, the work. And being a good judge, knowing what it means when something is creative, can help a child be more creative, examine their own work or others' work. Consumption is the uptake of creative ideas. And so children can learn to engage with new ideas as a habit. And not that they created the idea, but they can be familiarized that and drawn, attracted to thinking about ideas that are new proposed by others. And finally, curricula is how to do it at school, for example, to what activities to use to develop creativity. And if you look at the literature, you can see studies about all these aspects, each 7 of the C's. Okay, next. Here, I'd like to focus a few minutes on the creators. Who are these people who can engage in creativity? What do they got? Well, we'd like to say partly they have a way of thinking abilities, cognition, like mental flexibility, maybe. Maybe they have knowledge on a topic, so that's useful. That's an ingredient. They also have cognitive and emotional ingredients, which is like personality traits like openness, maybe being in a positive emotional state at some moments when they work is useful. And they have an environment that's potentially stimulating. So these are ingredients. And thanks to these ingredients, we could say they've got more or less potential to be creative. At the moment, they did nothing yet. They're just sitting around with potential. And then they have a chance to engage with the arrow you see, the big arrow in white. That's the process of engaging their potential to do something. And then they got a production, which is more or less original. That's the creative production. And so this is the kind of basic concept slide that we can study and try to boost the ingredients. For example, you could give mental flexibility exercises. You could give things to enhance the open-mindedness of the kids. You could set up the school classroom to be stimulating, maybe. This would enhance the potential. But you need to have the kids engage the potential in activities and see the result and give feedback. Next slide. Here's some examples of famous cases of creativity, like Van Gogh. And Van Gogh, when you look at what happened to him, he was very creative, in particular during a few years of his work, when all the ingredients came together, you see. So great cases often involve all the ingredients coming together. And by the way, you see a picture of Van Gogh, you see a picture of a French painter called Millet. And you see, Millet was a source of inspiration for Van Gogh. Well, Van Gogh had an environment in which he was able to see other painters' work. And that was part of the ingredients that helped Van Gogh get his ideas. You also see Martin Cooper, who is considered the inventor of the cell phone. And he's there with the first cell phone. You should know that he had a certain knowledge, so it's not totally random that he invented the cell phone, because he worked with the walkie-talkie systems before. And he used to have to set up and sell walkie-talkie systems for airports and things. They asked him to solve the problem to make the product cheaper. And so he decided he would have to remove components. He removed in the walkie-talkie the part where you talk, so you could only listen. He said, make it cheaper. He removed the part where you can listen. So what did it do? It only beeped. It became a beeper. And when he deployed the beeper system, he discovered that people were unhappy because when it beeped, they wanted to talk wherever they were. But this required what was called a mobile walkie-talkie worldwide system, which required totally reinventing the engineering of all walkie-talkies. And so he had an insight, let's say, but he was not a random person. He was an expert in walkie-talkies. Okay. Okay, and he had a whole team. So he's an example of collaborative creativity. Let's go to the next slide. Now, in the next slide, I'd like to mention that the ingredients have to come into play in the process. And if you look at famous cases, they can help us to structure how to think about creativity for the average person and for teaching it to children or adolescents or adults. And so I'm going to simplify greatly this whole story into the creative process composed of two aspects: divergent exploratory thinking. In the next slide, we see. From a starting point, you look in many directions. That's part of the process. And in the slide after, convergent integrative thinking, which is the complementary aspect. In the next slide there, you see convergent integrative, in which we bring together ideas to form a new totality. So the creative process can involve both moments, divergent and convergent, and the ingredients like openness, flexibility, they come in at these different moments in specific ways. But the details I won't get into. So now I'd like to show you some things from our measurement tool called Epoch, which is on the next slide. And we developed it over the years since 2000. So now we're at like 20 years of development of this. And it started in French. Now it's in other languages. It was used in Brazil as part of the OECD study. So we have some parts in Portuguese, and it has norms, and it lets you test a child in different domains of creative thinking, like graphic, artistic, literary, verbal, but also math, science, social, and so forth. Okay, next slide. But the test of Epoch focuses on potential, not what a child did already, but what the child can do. And so we ask the child to show us what they can do. Take, for example, this walnut that you see that fell from a tree. The walnut has potential to be part of salad and be eaten. It has a potential to become a tree in the ground. It has potential to be a souvenir. If you took a walk in nature, you bring it home. Or it could go up to the space station and be a science experiment. Or it could be a toy, like you see, some toy pictures. So from its initial state, it could become many things. And our testing is designed to see what a child could do. This is important for education because if you don't have any idea of the starting point of a child, it's hard to provide exercises to help the child get anywhere. Okay, next. So what do? We are going to ask the child to do divergent exploratory, convergent integrative in different domains. Okay, next. Here's what one French child did with a banana picture. This child did 10 drawings in the time given using banana form. 10 drawings of a child of 9 years old is a little bit above the average of 9-year-old in France. So this child would get a score slightly above average compared to the peers in France. Maybe in Brazil, 10 drawings for a child of 9 years old will give them a different spot compared to other Brazilian kids. Next, in the convergent integrative part example of the drawing domain, we give, for example, pictures of objects, and the child makes one big drawing using as many objects as we can. This child made a kind of simplistic bedroom scene with many objects. It's not very original. It's not very integrated. Let's see the next drawing. Here, a child made an average idea of going fishing. It's more integrated, but it's not extremely original in France. Next drawing. Here, two different children combine the elements in a more integrated way. They deserve a higher score, and you see they used objects in unusual ways. Like in the one on the left, you've got the light bulb as feet, the valise as a body of this kind of rabbit creature. On the one on the right, you've got what the child calls a samurai warrior, and all of our objects have been used unusual ways. Like the sword is composed of a carrot and the wood mannequin, for example. The body of the warrior is the light bulb, and his head or her head is the fish. Okay, that deserves a high score. Now, here's some drawings from Brazil. Because of the OECD study, we have a few examples. Next slide. And some of the judges, super judges for Brazil, I think are present at the talk today. This one's hard to see, but it's a basic drawing with a few objects put down, like a light bulb, a fish, and a mannequin. Next drawing, it deserves not much. Next drawing, kind of a basic idea of a house scene with a little bit unusual novel thing of the snowman, which I don't think you find that often in Brazil. Okay, next. Here's a more unusual drawing, quite well integrated, where this kind of light bulb creature is riding on the fish, but it's all directed by a marionettist who is the mannequin. Okay, that's getting a higher score. And next, another pretty good idea. Okay, next slide. You see the judge interface where we put the drawings in, and a judge can look from a distance and give a score 1 to 7. Next slide. Here you see a judge looking at many drawings to make sure they agree they all deserve the same score of like 4. Next slide. So a kid will get a score on divergent graphic, divergent verbal, integrative graphic, integrative verbal. If it was mathematics, it would be divergent math, integrative math. And they can be placed compared to other kids. We use a 100, we use an IQ-like score. So 100 means your average, 15-point standard deviation, 130 means you're so-called gifted creative. Next. Here you see one kid's profile, individual. This kid is relatively better in divergent graphic and integrative graphic, meaning graphic domain, compared relatively to the verbal domain. So this can give an idea for differentiated exercises for this kid, for example. Sometimes a kid is not creative at all in a domain like graphic because they're quite good on divergent but not good on integrative. So in the end, they can't do anything much because you need both. Okay, next slide. We've done studies of construct validity, how the test battery fits with our model, and we find that the different exercises we have line up as we think and gives us domain scores of graphic domain creativity, verbal domain, and there is a link of divergence across domains, but it's weak. There's a link of integration across domains, but it's weak. And there is a teeny little factor, general factor, which can be found, but it's so teeny, it's not too much useful to talk about it. We don't give any general score because it's a teeny thing. Next. By the way, this was also replicated so far in a study in Hong Kong and a study in Slovenia. Okay, next. As you might expect, in the next slide, their relation to intelligence, which is coming, you see how correlations between epoch scores, divergent graphic, divergent verbal, integrative graphic, integrative verbal, with WISC scores are all kind of low, like 0.1, 0.2, -2. So this is as expected because Wechsler's battery is related to Binet's work, and essentially Wechsler's stuff, it measures regular school stuff, and the creativity stuff is different. So they're not too related. Next slide. This is a study that you can look up if you're interested, in which we trained novice judges with a few little training sequence of like looking at a few drawings and stories and giving feedback as a judge. And we were able to boost their quality of judging very much by this small training exercise. And so they became very good judges, very much in agreement with each other and with expert judges after a small amount of training. Just to show that judging creativity is not something that's only reserved for some super judges. Of course, I know a few super judges are here, but they're representing Brazil, the super judges. And so they help us establish the norms in the country, in fact. Next. A few words about the creative process, because as you know, talking about divergence, convergence is a simplified thing, okay? And it's useful to start, but we did some studies with more university student level, and we looked at how they create, what's their process. And I like to show you a result that might give you ideas for your own teaching to help kids trace the activity of creative work. Next slide. So this study is with university students who are art students, and they produce sculpture in this class. So it's a real class. You see some sculptures, you see some of their art notebooks. They come for like 10, 12 sessions in the sculpture studio. And during those sessions, they work on the project. Next. Each session, we give them a checklist. And on the checklist, at the end of the session, they check what they did. So they can check several activities. They can check that they define the problem. They can check they ask questions to themselves or to others. They can check that they got documentation about other artists' work. They can check off that they had an idea, that they made associations, that they tried sculpture, called experimenting, that they evaluated their work, that they took a break, pause, okay? So they can check several things. Okay, then we go next slide. This shows the overall flow diagram of when you check off one thing, what you tend to do after. So this is a composite of many students, and it shows that you see the different blue boxes are different activities that you can do any moment you want in a session. And so when you question what's your topic, you see an arrow. It often goes to defining what your topic is, which seems logical. When you define, you often go for documentation, and it often leads you back to define. And when you do questioning, some people, it leads them to the experimenting, trying it out phase, or it leads them to evaluating their ideas. And so this is a flow diagram of activity to activity constructed for a group. However, you can construct it for an individual person too. How do they tend to move from one part of the process to the next? And this can help kids understand how they think creatively. By the way, it might interest you to know that Lego has created a special Lego set that lets children kind of do this process tracing, in fact, as a school activity. Next slide. Here you see two different diagrams of flow. One is for the so-called less creative students. They're less creative because at the end of the 12 weeks, they get a grade for the creation of the sculpture by the expert professors. And so then we take those people's diagrams, we put them together, and we get the composite you see. Compared to the more creative students who got a very high grade on creativity, and you see their diagrams. All the boxes are in the same location. So each box, like define, is in the same spot on both diagrams, but you see the arrows of connection are different. This means that the flow chart, the step-to-step, is not the same for those who will end up to be creative and those who end up to be not too creative. So it's like saying if you go from Brasilia to Rio de Janeiro, you start one place, you end the other, but you go however you want. You take any road you want. Some people get there quicker, they use less gas in their car, and other people, they go to the Iguazu, and they finally arrive, we don't know how, to Rio de Janeiro a couple months later. And obviously their flow chart is not the same as those who take just a couple of days to drive it, okay? And some of them, they end up in Manaus, and they get disoriented, and they got to go to Chile before they can get back, okay? So this is an example of a process that goes more or less well, more or less efficient, and that's part of the creativity story. So you could help students gain insight into their process, okay? By the way, just for example, when those students come back from a break, art students in sculpture class, some of them would start evaluating what they did so far, naturally. What I did so far good after my break? Some of them come back and they start free associating to their project after the break. Those who free associate end up weeks later to be the ones who are more creative. And those who right away evaluate what they did so far, it's like the prognostic for them is bad. Okay? So when you see a person doing it, you can predict you're going to end up in a not very creative result a few weeks later. Okay. Next slide. A few words about the context. You know, the classroom context might stimulate. I like to show you some work we did outside of school, obviously, but just to get you ideas, okay? So this is in the virtual context. Now with COVID, you might start to think you could have a virtual classroom, in fact. And instead of doing some kind of Zoom, you might put your class in a classroom that is simply virtual. And in this Second Life world here, which you may know exists, you can get an avatar and hang around and meet other avatars. So you can get an avatar in Second Life today and hang out. There's about 40,000 avatars hanging out right now at every minute of every day. And you can go hang out. You can hang out with Brazilian avatars, but you can hang out with French ones, whoever you want. Let's go to the next slide. So next slide. Next slide. Sorry. In the next slide again. Yeah. So here you see a island that we rent, our laboratory. And we built a park on the island, and we built a artist house that you'll see in the next slide. And so we put people in the artist house. We ask them to do creative thinking. You cannot go to our artist house because it's private and it has a force field around it. So you cannot just walk in and sit down and hang around in our artist house. But we put our students in there, and it has many indicators for the students that suggest this is a place where you can be creative. It's symbolic for them. And their avatar is in there. And we want to see if we can boost their creativity thanks to the environment. Next slide. Here you see our storage room. It's not so stimulating for their creativity. Next slide. Here you see our meeting room, basic, neutral. And you see our real meeting room where we put real people in their real body as a control condition. Next slide. Here you see on the right, the number of ideas, on the left, the originality of ideas, divergent thinking, how to use a box. When you're in the artist house, beach house, you get significantly more ideas, significantly more original ideas than when you're in the meeting room, virtual, or the prison room, storage. The meeting room and the prison room are not too different, in fact. And in addition, if you're in the real meeting room, it's very like the virtual meeting room performance. Okay? So this is just a simple demonstration that you can boost it through environment. Next slide. Here you see people in the real room, or you see other people avatar in the meeting room avatar. They're doing a task to get ideas to improve transport in Paris. Next slide. Here you see results that show yet again, being in the virtual is better than being in the real meeting room. Okay, next slide. In this part, we gave people avatars that are not just basic. Either we give them a non-inventor avatar, like student, engineering, or we give them engineering students a inventor avatar, kind of like an Einstein type. We want to see the effect of thinking of yourself as a creative person. And the effect of thinking of yourself and self-concept is studied a lot these days as an important thing to develop at school. So people feel they are a creative person. Well, when you put yourself in an avatar, you kind of tend to feel a little like your avatar. It's like wearing a costume at Halloween or something. Next slide. So in this study, they're going to be put into a virtual room in their avatar body. They're going to do a task, and then they come out in their real body and they do another task in the real room, back to normal body. Next slide. Here you see in the next slide, in blue, the number of ideas for the inventor avatar people is significantly more than for the non-inventor avatar people. And it's just different students who are all similar at the start. And the control group is normal students of engineering school who are in the real room in their real body. So it's the baseline. And in the slide over there, it's a little messed up looking, sorry, graphically, but I draw your attention to the light gray bar. The light gray bar is what happens to these groups when they come out of the avatar condition into the real life body after. You see that there's a longer effect, and when they leave the avatar they had, they're back to normal body. they show similar performance. Notably, those who had the inventor avatar are still showing benefits of that creative spirit. Next slide. Here's a study in a school context, which compared Montessori classes, Frenet, which you may know is a kind of a French Montessori guy, but different, and classical French classrooms, which we call tradition. And so these classrooms are matched on socioeconomic status, by the way. So you see different school grades. CP is first grade in France. CE1 is second grade. CE2 is third grade. CM1 is fourth grade, and CM2 is fifth grade. And these are not the same kids. They're just kids tested the same day, let's say. And they're using divergent thinking. And what you see is that in the end, after years, these kids in the fifth grade have been in those schools all the years, by the way. The Montessori and Frenet kids are getting more ideas than the classical kids.
The first
maybe an effect of pedagogy through environment. And by the way, there's something called the fourth grade slump. They're using creativity literature, which you see in the yellow curve, and there's a slump, and it goes up. And if you look at correlation, look, the fourth grade slump happens a year earlier for Montessori and Frenet. In other words, this is an environmental effect on a basic developmental slump in divergent thinking, which is pushed earlier in certain school contexts. Next slide. This is a result from Thailand, part of the OECD type study, in which you have a large number of classrooms that are called experimental. They're called experimental there. And you have a large number of classrooms called control classrooms. Experimental classrooms have teachers who try to use creative thinking activities between pre-test, post-test. Pre-test is in blue, post-test is in orange. And what you see is that for divergent exploratory thinking, DE, the experimental classrooms, they boost the kids compared to the controls. And in integrative convergent, CI, the controls go up pre-test, post-test, naturally speaking, but the experimentals go up a little bit more, but it's not a huge difference. So you can see the teachers kind of were successful to boost more the divergent exploratory. Maybe it's more easy to boost that aspect. There is variation among teachers. Some give a bigger boost than others. So there could be teacher development to help all teachers give a big boost. Next slide. I'm almost done. This is my almost last slide. So there's different ways to develop creativity in school. You could give training activities for ingredients like mental flexibility, openness. You could do a general curriculum like a Montessori approach. You could also have the teacher be role modeling creative thinking, the teacher showing how they do creative thinking to students. In the OECD study, the big result was that first, teachers do arrive to boost creativity in students when they try, with exercises that each teacher devised on their own. There was no kit to use. Second of all, teachers at the beginning of the study, like 20% say they think they can stimulate creativity in kids. At the end of the study, after trying, experimental teachers, 75% say they think they can boost creativity. So the teachers gain in self-efficacy, let's say. And the key is often teacher training. This is the focus in most countries today. Train the teachers so they can give to the kids exercises that might be good. Last slide coming up. Yes. This is just to summarize. We look at creativity with many ingredients. They come in the creative process. Creative potential, we can measure it with a test like EPUC. We can think about it in terms of divergent, exploratory, convergent, integrative. Measuring it is important because it lets teachers have a benchmark so they can see if they have effective exercises. And what is measured in school has some importance, by the way. So then creative process, it could be traced, maybe pedagogy developed in a tracing activity. And creative potential, it can be developed also maybe through the school environment. But the example I gave was research that's a little bit more virtual, but even that could be virtual environment for teaching someday too, even. But you can think about the real school environment today. In next slide, the next slide, I have my email. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for your attention. I hope the timing is good and easy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Todd Lubart. Your lecture was very inspiring. You gave us some insights about how to investigate creativity, which dimensions of creativity should be considered, and most important, how to nurture creativity. Thank you so much. I'd like also to open the question. If you have some time, you can ask people to ask some questions, and people can write down on the chat some questions, and I'm going to select some of them. Antes de mais nada, eu também gostaria de agradecer a presença de todos que estão aqui, né? Agradecer a presença de vocês no colóquio e, enfim, e especialmente por estar aqui com o professor Todd Lubart, né? Professora Cleis Marinho, Dr. Lubart, I don't know if you remember Professor Cleis Marinho, she was with you in Amsterdam at the EPS conference a couple of years ago. And
in Paris too.
In Paris and in Amsterdam as well, right?
Yeah.
She's the coordinator of the school psychology colloquium. And
yeah, nice nice to see you.
Well,
hello, Professor. We have the pleasure to have present. Good home, good home.
Você poderia fechar o seu áudio, por favor?
You know, there's a lot of wind over there. I hear a lot of wind.
Yeah, I think it's raining in Brasília, maybe from another place in Brazil. Se quiserem fazer alguma pergunta ao professor, ao professor Taruba, por favor, peço a vocês que escrevam no chat. Todd, I have a question. Some research you have conducted in Brazil, we realize that teachers and the school recognize the importance of creativity, but they usually don't know how to do it. So I believe that the professional development in creativity, in the creativity area, will be very helpful for our teachers, and I know creativity training in general. Do you agree with this? It's different in France, in the United States, and other countries that you have been studying?
In most studies of teachers, you always find that they say creativity is good, important, creativity should be developed, but they don't quite know what to do. This is very common. There are studies like that in Europe, United States. We had a student in our lab who was actually from Benin, which is a country in Africa, and Benin, I believe you say, maybe, did a study of teachers in Benin and found the same kind of thing there too.
Okay. We have a question here. I believe that the traditional school, the classic school, could inhibit the development of the students' creativity.
The classic school, it might, let's say, I don't think that it actively inhibits, but it doesn't do too much to stimulate. And it does stimulate other stuff, like maybe critical thinking, for example, and that other stuff, because it's like active sport. If you stimulate the right arm all the time, the left arm gets weak. Okay? So you didn't specifically have a program to make the left arm weak. It wasn't your specific activity to tie up the left arm, but since all the attention was given to the right arm, that one got stronger, and everyone looks at the right arm, and they don't ever look at the left arm, for example. So I don't want to say schools are inherently against creativity, but the structure of the schools and the grades and the amount of time spent on things or whatever is necessarily lined up to be good for creativity.
Okay. A couple of years ago, one of my grad students conducted a study when she compared open schools like Freinet School, I believe, Montessori schools, with traditional schools and with what we call intermediary schools. Some schools that have some characteristics that are open and traditional schools. And we use the TTC test, the Taurus Test, to measure the level of creativity of the students. And there were no differences among the three groups of students. So we believe that maybe we should consider the needs of the students, the characteristics, something like that. To know, I believe that maybe it's necessary to have like a match between what the student needs and what the school can offer to them. Do you agree with this, or?
Well, I think that it's always complicated. I mean, to not have more details about the study makes it a little tricky to give a good comment. But first of all, you have to look into the composition of the students in those different schools, because you don't find the open schools necessarily in the same neighborhoods as the not so open schools. So you have to be careful about the compositional comparison of the students in the schools. Then you got to think about the Taurus test, and using that as a definition of creativity it's a partial definition because it focuses on divergent thinking.
Yes.
And our current thinking, we need also convergent thinking, convergent integrative. And the Taurus test, for example, it has what they say figural and verbal. In figural, you make drawings. It's like artistic. Although it's just drawing to express your ideas, it's not necessarily to be an artist. In the verbal, you use words to give ideas, like how to use a box. You say it in words. But it's not verbal literary creation like in our measure chapters, we ask them to invent a story. It's a meaningful task because it's like be an author of a story. So it's not the same thing. And if the Taurus tests are far from school activities, far from the reality of the students, you might not see a benefit of different school context because it's too far from a real student task. So it's hard to know, but also there is large, very large variability in teachers. If you look at teachers in the open schools, some of them are running a classroom that looks like a closed school. Okay? Right. So some of them are very much, and some in some traditional schools, their classroom is a mini open school. So you've got big variability, and teacher variability is more and more an interesting topic to study.
Okay, great. We have two more questions. One is written in French. I will try to say. Il y a différence entre les écoles de campagne et les écoles de ville quand on travaille la créativité. Well, maybe
okay, you're asking about a comparison of country, rural schools and city schools.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we are obviously, those school contexts reflect more than just a school. The rural, this country school is in a part of the country that's got like farms and things. Okay. And the city school is obviously in a city where there's museums and a high density of population and more chance to cross people from different cultures in the city compared to the countryside, where it's maybe more homogeneous population. So the city school is much more than simply a school in a city. It's a whole cultural context that's different. And these cultural contexts can have effects, strong effects on children's creativity. More often, studies suggest that if a child is exposed to multicultures, people from different cultures they see here and there, even in their classroom, it's stimulating for their creativity.
Right.
So if they're near museums, it's stimulating, relatively speaking. If they're near other access points to role models of artists, for example, it's stimulating for their creativity. So this is, the question opened up many questions, in fact.
Okay. One more question. How to promote the motivational environment for teachers in Brazil, for that they can motivate the students to develop creativity despite the negative scenario of the educational system? How to motivate our teachers?
Well, to motivate the teachers or to motivate the students? That how can the teachers motivate the students is one issue. To the extent that creativity is listed as a goal in school, it becomes motivational to reach the goal. And students can even get grades oriented towards their creative thinking. If the teachers can get skilled to evaluate creative thinking, compare kids' ideas, and say that's more original, that's less original, they can give grades in some way or another, and it makes it have a value in the school system. Whatever is important in school has a grade. That's the bottom line of school. And if the school system says we value creativity, teachers who are able to promote it will be given recognition, let's say, that they're a good teacher, let's say. So I don't know in Brazil if teacher recognition is even how it works, if they get an award, if they even have some salary relationship to their performance, maybe not. But in any case, just to even feel that they're a good teacher and they're doing a good job has value in the teaching field. And so they can see that they are helping kids develop this 21st century skill of making their teaching job more meaningful, potentially. So there's different ideas like that that are, you know, people are working on around in different countries. People work on that kind of motivational question.
Okay. Well, we don't have any other questions. Alguma pergunta? Gente? Well, no more questions. I think your presentation was very clear, very objective, and very inspiring. Thank you very much again, Dr. Lubart, for accepting our invitation. It's an honor, a pleasure to have you here in our Brazilian conference, and we hope to see you in the near future. Maybe next year.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. And I don't see everybody's name on the screen because my screen only shows some names, but I'm happy to see some of the colleagues who I know. I happened to saw Asdrubal was saying hello. So, and by the way, he's a super judge for Brazil. So if you got questions, he's an example of someone you can refer to. And I thank, and there may be other people who I happen to know already, but I can't see your photos. I only see a few photos on my screen. And so I thank Denise for this invitation because thanks to the new technology, the travel time to be part of your event in Brazil has been greatly reduced, as I only had to move from my kitchen to near the Wi-Fi spot in my home. So nice to be with you, and have a good continuing Congress.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I hope maybe next year you can come to visit us in Brazil. Who knows? Let's see. If
You never know.
Right? Until
Yeah,
then.
sure. Yeah, okay. All right, then. Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Lubart. And eu gostaria também de agradecer a todos que participaram dessa sessão e espero que vocês continuem aproveitando a nossa programação para o resto do dia e também a programação de amanhã. Muito obrigada e uma boa manhã para todos vocês. Thank you, Todd. See you. Thank you.
Bye.